started. Rebecca, are you good for recording on your end?
Yes, I am.
All right. So I will call the Waunakee Community School District Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee to order. It's Tuesday, February 16th, 2021 at a little after 6 p.m. As we usually do for our roll call, I will go down the list of people who are here. If you can unmute yourself and state here after I say your name, that's a good test to make sure we can all hear you too. So starting off, we'll go with Brian Hafer.
Here.
Not Brian Heffer as Dave called you last week.
Either or.
Diane Rusk.
Oops, here.
Monique Mobley.
Present.
Katie Grindall.
Here.
Tim Schell.
Here.
Allison Voller.
Here.
Audrey Deppen.
Here.
Bethany Pottinger.
Here.
Christy Shupman.
Here.
Zoom is doing its very best to change the participant order around as I read it, so I'll do my best. Gina Pagel.
Here.
Isabella Moore.
Here.
Joel Lewis.
Here.
Laura Ostrander.
Here.
Leslie Petty.
Here.
Melanie Meister.
Here. Here.
I heard you. I'm just
Okay.
trying to get to the next person in line. Melissa Hernandez.
Here.
Michelle Berg.
Here.
Lucky I didn't say Michelle's iPhone, Michelle. Nia Vang.
Here.
Pamela Potter.
Here.
Paul Whitley.
Here.
Sam Kaufman.
Here.
Mike Pisani.
Here.
And did I miss anyone? Christy Shupman, did I get you?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry. The
Okay.
participant list occasionally moves around a bit. All right.
Steph chat.
What's that, Rebecca? Sorry.
Stephanie, is she in?
Oh, I don't see her. No, I think that's everybody. So if anybody else pops in, we can always acknowledge them. At that point, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes of our previous meetings. I believe those were sent out by Rebecca last week.
I motion.
Second.
Motion by Joel and seconded by Sam. All in favor, say aye.
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 Hi. Hi.
All opposed, say nay. Hearing none. The agenda was sent out, I believe, at some point last week. Unless there's any request to make any specific changes, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as currently written.
I motion.
To approve.
I heard Joel. I think someone else also said something. So Gina.
I'll
you-
second. With Diane.
I was trying to unmute. I'm sorry. I just wanted to note that we talked about discussing like a timeline for moving forward, which I don't know if that's included in either of these items or if that's something that would need to be added.
I think that's something that we can talk about and also
Okay.
rationalize under future meetings as well, because that's just generally talking about when we're scheduling them and what we're scheduling them for. So I think that's germane to that area.
Great, thanks.
All right, so the motion was by Joel and seconded by Diane. All in favor, say aye.
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 Hi.
All opposed, say nay. Hearing no one, we can move on to section 6 regarding discussion and possible action on interim recommendations to the board regarding issues of immediate concern. So,
Mike,
go ahead.
question. Do we need to read that public comment that Rebecca sent?
So we did receive some public comments. Someone anticipated we might get some based on the subject matter for today. I believe they were sent out by Rebecca.
I forwarded all three of them to the entire committee.
Okay.
Yep, I received them. I think everyone should have. I looked at them today.
All right, and they are somewhat similar to ones I received. I think I got some additional ones that were not sent to everybody else. But I will say that they were all pretty much the same. I did receive another one from Arbina Martin, who I think is Madison as well. And Rebecca sent that one out about 40 minutes ago. So Joel, to answer your question, I don't think we need to read them into the record. They'll be included with, Rebecca, I think we include these public comments that are in writing with minutes afterwards, and they get posted in board books. So anyone who wants to read them after the fact can read them, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So we received those comments. I don't think anyone specifically asked that they be read aloud, but they'll be available for anyone who was watching this later to go in and take a look at them. So,
And just as an FYI, we now post all of our agendas that any emailed comments are only read by the committee or board and attached to the agendas. They are not read out loud during the meeting.
okay. Yeah, that after last year, we discovered that can take some time. So I guess with that, I'll get back to our agenda then.
Can I say that I appreciated hearing those letters and reading those letters? So thank you to the letter writers. I feel as if they made strong statements, and it just helps me be better informed on the committee. That was Monique Mobley.
One other just kind of housekeeping thing before we actually launch into any of the discussion. I had it brought up that we'd had a pretty good success with people raising their hands and then me sending basically a chat box message to them stating that they would be up next. So a lot of people wouldn't necessarily jump in. I know it's kind of like we're sitting in a room together, and it's usually like you're kind of waiting for that pause in the conversation to be able to share something. But in order to kind of keep the flow here and make sure everybody gets their equal time, try to put a hand up virtually, and then I'll try to send a message out to everybody as discussion's going, okay? And thanks, Bethany, for sending that suggestion. I appreciate that. Agenda item 6, discussion on these possible interim recommendations. And Gina, I think you put it well when you said we should probably also have an overall discussion of timelines for how things would go. These 3 specific things that were included on here were kind of the product of our last discussion, as well as my conversation with Joel. And Joel, if you wanted to kind of take over and talk about some of these, feel free as well. My overall sense that I'll share is that regarding the use of American Indian imagery in the district was kind of more my push to have discussed. And Joel, I think that fair to say that B and C were some more that were more your ideas, a little bit more than mine.
Yes.
So go ahead. I mean, you want to take off with your 2.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, even with the American Indian imagery, I mean, that would actually tie in pretty good with the email that Rebecca sent.
Okay. So I guess from there, I mean, I'm open to anyone taking the floor or wanting to have any opinion on any of these issues. I mean, I'm happy to share my opinion, but I've never tried to make that be where we start discussions here. Diane, why don't you go ahead? I think you had your first hand up.
Thanks. Well, first, I really appreciated that public comment was solicited, and I really appreciated the comments shared with us, as well as the discussion from some of the members that they put into email. And I've been thinking about this a lot since we were talking about it last. And I think the comments just made me feel more that this is the time to do something, and perhaps we as a committee could, I'm wondering what you would like us to do, if we would draft a resolution with a recommendation for consideration to the Board of Education. I liked some of the language that was in the Wausau School District, so that was helpful to get a start. And I guess to address sort of the piece where there's public comment regarding, and I don't know that I saw this in public comment, but just things I've heard, in the community about, people suggesting that it's honoring, which I disagree with. If we did want to look at a way of recognition, I could see something more in a recognition of land, something like UW-Madison has done, recognizing that our schools are on the ancestral land of the Ho-Chunk people. To me, that would be sort of the most appropriate way. In addition to removing the emblem in the gym and finalizing whatever it means with the feather, I know that's maybe not official, but it seems like it's an unofficial thing. And then if there was something that was going to recognize, I think it should be done in the fact of a land recognition. So that's all I have to say, and look forward to others.
I think one thing, Diane, that I would at least comment on is in terms of the timing of what we can do. What I would be probably asking would be whether or not the committee feels comfortable making a recommendation to specifically do something about imagery, for example. And I'll bring up at least why I brought this up at this point, and then I'll shut up and get back to the list of people who have their hands up. I go back to this article that was published in the Tribune about a year and a month ago. And the headline was, Waunakee School Board rejects proposal denouncing Native mascots, which I will tell everyone irritated the hell out of me at the time, because we didn't actually reject a proposal denouncing mascots. We did not strongly put in a request at the state school board convention to pass the resolution that Ms. Zonker referenced. And that was, if anyone has experienced this, and Brian, you did it this year, the School Board Association puts forth resolutions that don't go anywhere, because generally it's just a resolution, and up until last year, there wasn't anyone who was really listening to what school boards wanted. And the resolution was basically saying it should take away local control over certain things about, in this case, Native mascots. And I think it was either Julie Weiner or Mark Hetzel, who were representing the district that year, voted against the resolution because we wanted local control. That isn't saying we were rejecting changing anything. It was saying that we just wanted local control. And I would note that at the end of that article, Mark, who was the Vienna representative on the board, said he was hopeful that we'd have discussions about doing these changes at our next board meeting. And that was back in February of 2020. And then the pandemic hit, and we've done nothing about it a year since. And that's not his fault or anybody's fault in particular, but with the formation of this committee, I thought it was an appropriate place to make that step, to have a conversation like this before it gets up to the level of a group of people who are able to do something about it quickly. So that's why I brought it up. Thank you for Diane for kind of talking about timelines, because I think that's something we can do now. So Brian, you had your hand up first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did. And I just wanted to piggyback on that. It was a good lead in. So I did attend the Wisconsin Association of School Board, and they did have a resolution this year again to sort of end the use of race-based imagery, including school mascots and logos. So that overwhelmingly passed. But what all that means is we're in favor of the school board associations in favor of trying to work through that and get them out. It doesn't mean that the school districts have to remove them at this point. It's just as a as the association, we're in favor of removing those from our schools. So, and it sort of goes hand in hand with our Act 31 resolution that went through. Act 31, and I'm sure Tim can talk a little bit more about this as well, regarding actual curriculum, regarding the 11 federally recognized American Indian nations and tribal communities within our school systems. Act 31 provides the request or a requirement for the school districts to teach background on that history, but there is no accountability per se, and they're asking for more resources in order to teach that curriculum in our school district, and that passed as well overwhelmingly by the group. Again, it is just saying that we're in favor of those. So it's a good time for this to come up.
Thanks, Brandon. Leslie, you're next.
So I think you're getting a little bit closer to my question. My one question is, what other cultural appropriation images exist in other schools in the district outside of the high school? Okay, so we are aware of this one imagery right here in the high school, but what other images that we should be aware of, and perhaps we're not, as far as representation on this committee? The other, so that's one question. The other question I do have is, what is the exact process to remove these images? What if it's not the process of through a resolution, which is pretty much affirming sort of where we stand with these images? What is the actual process? Because I think this is a reckoning for the school district at this point, to acknowledge that we have inappropriate images that don't fully represent, or perhaps represent, the direction we wish to go in.
I think I could probably answer at least the second part, Leslie. I think it could take a policy that the board passes to do it, or it could simply be administration making the change. But given that, you know, we're a representative democracy, we should reflect what the people actually want. And I think it's an important thing that board members have to put their position down on, to be honest. So it's something that is a policy that could be relatively easily drafted. Other districts have done this. Verona used to be the Indians, I believe, and they changed to the Wildcats about 25 years ago. I assume they had a way of doing it. I think most districts have done that. So it could be something as simple as slowly phasing things out over time because the administration is wise enough to not call attention to it, or it could be a board member pushing for it because it's something that's a moral imperative. It doesn't matter how it does happen. I think my perspective is that it matters that it does happen. So I think I've mentioned this before, and I'm sure Randy has talked to many of us about this, is that over time, it's just kind of started to go away slowly. The high school basketball court used to have a giant logo in the center of it that was less appropriate than I think many of us would like. When the floor was replaced, the design was changed, and no one was the wiser. We didn't call attention to it. So that's one way to do it. But it also doesn't deal with the issue when it's continually being used. And I think, just to very briefly answer your question about where else is it in the school district, I can tell you, I don't know if I've ever seen it in Arboretum, and I have 2 kids that go there. But if
I'm talking
one,
about other images, not so much of a Native American, but other images.
right, I mean, I don't think I have seen, for example, like any of the logos that use spears or feathers or anything like that in any of the elementary schools. It appears to just, at least from my perspective, to be solely the high school, maybe the middle school. And it's largely circulated around sports. Like I don't think drama club has a spear, for example. So, and part of it too is if one were to just go and search for Waunakee logo, I'll just share my screen here very briefly. If one does a Google search, this is what pops up instantly for Waunakee logo. It's something with a spear and a feather. There's a variety of different types of logos, all having a similar theme to it. I thought it was a joke when Randy told me years ago that the district has maybe 20 different logos. That's probably being kind. There's tons of them. We don't have a brand or anything like that. And again, had a pandemic not happened, one of the things the district was doing in hiring a communications specialist was probably to get launched into doing something that was more of a branding effort too. I don't frankly think we need to wait on a branding effort to remove something that shouldn't already be there. But that I think was part of the thought process that this district had. So that's really the only place I see this actually existing other than that mural that's in the old high school gym. So
Mike, as another board member, let me chime in because I've been sort of waiting for something that was actionable from this committee. I think you do need to put your voice to paper and give it to the board to present for a discussion. My feeling is that this is going to be a public comment discussion in favor and not in favor. And I think the only reason people want to keep it is because their parents and grandparents played football and basketball and stuff with the same logo and the same. It has nothing to do, I think, with the Native American imagery. It's just, that's what we did here in Waunakee. So it needs to change. We need to educate everybody. So it is going to take a little bit. So I'm hoping from this committee, you can present something, a proposal, so Mike and I can take it back to the board and we can get this going sooner than later. So Leslie, that's would be the next steps here.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to make it clear, Michael, that I am actually referencing any other cultural appropriation image, not respective only of sports, but any other that perhaps we may not be as sensitive to, but it is real. So I just want to put that out there, that we just haven't brought to the table. Thank you.
that's a good point. That's one of those unknown unknowns that we don't know, and I don't actually know if there are other things out there. But that may actually be more related to Joel's other two issues discussed too, of how people would make reports on things. Audrey, you were next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I really agree with Brian, and how I think there'll be a lot of backlash necessarily with some people just because of generational things. And I think a lot of people don't see it as blatantly racist, but I think it's definitely a microaggression that needs to be addressed. One thing of imagery that I've seen, I believe this is still up, but in the old gym at the high school, we have a mural of sorts, or like a wooden cutout of an indigenous man that's just hanging on the old gym. And I think that would be one thing to address as well when talking about reforming things for those.
Thanks, Audrey. Joel, go ahead. You had your hand up next.
Yeah, it was Shawnee here. So Audrey, you said it was an image of what?
A Native American man, an indigenous man.
Oh, okay. Are you talking about the big tapestry?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I believe
See, to me, that's something easy that could be done. As you're saying, Mike, especially with that, a lot of people didn't even know that was a thing, right? I guess, unless you're in there. But I think, to me, that's something, especially since, what was it, a community member who painted it or, did that. So it's not like it's part of the school, it's per se. So maybe we should start at least with that, taking that down. There's no reason for that to be up. Now, obviously, what Brian said about the whole Waunakee symbol, hopefully as Corona goes away and then there's a communication person and then, maybe branding, maybe that's where that can be. And again, like Brian said, we need to put it on paper. But I think to get that low hanging fruit, I think that the tapestry should come down. What does anybody else think about that?
Well, Joel, that leads really nicely to my turn, which I'm after you.
Okay.
Everyone, everyone here is always so nice. And maybe it's because it's 6 o'clock and I spent a whole day listening to so many airing of grievances from other people that I'm just like, yeah, let's take it down. I mean, I just don't see, I, I don't see, you can't convince me not to, you know what I mean? At one point, you know, my kids wouldn't have been able to sit next to, let's say, gonna pick on you, Mike, because you're the co-host, your kids at lunch. And we wouldn't be able to fathom that today, And maybe I don't see just because it was okay once and someone's grandparent or something has things change and sometimes you gotta let it go, I just don't understand that. And also, I think the whole point of this is our committee exists because we're supposed to make change and do something. And if Waunakee really wants to do something, we should be able to be like, that needs to go. We're not tolerating that. Done. Otherwise, I mean, if this is just one of those dog and pony shows where we've got a diversity and equity committee, which I've been off and I'm tired and I'm going to quit. But I'm like, if that's all it's a dog and pony show, I am done. I'm not signing on at 6 to participate at that because my energy is drained. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I did have not a great day, so I apologize for not sounding super enthused. But I think it just has to go. I just don't understand why not. And my brain is blown that it's still here. But my kids go to Heritage, and I have walked around, and there's no Leslie, for you to know, there's no other cultural appropriation that I can see of. There's just painting of kids in many different colors on the walls. So, all right, done. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Nia. And just for the record, if anybody wants to use me as an example of cis white male hegemony at any point, you have my consent. I'm not going to be offended.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you for that. I did just
anytime.
pull
Go
you
ahead.
out. Okay, thanks.
Gina, you are next.
I just wanted to urge the group to have courage in this. I'm hearing some references to we could just quietly do this or that. And I think this requires taking a stand and saying, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And really make a strong statement with it, because nothing happens without notice and then you're reacting to it. So I would just encourage us to show courage and make a statement to go with any changes. I would also encourage us to include some long range, this is what we want to see in the future. I also think, we keep hearing of it's on this shirt, it's on that shirt. The board can state that it's not allowed to be included from this point forward. And I think that wouldn't be something that people couldn't creatively avoid, right? Every athletic apparel, every t-shirt sold in the high school, every team t-shirt at any school in the district, that we do not appropriate images from cultures that are not our own. And as a district, we don't have our own culture. So I don't think it's appropriate anywhere. And so I think taking down the tapestry and saying why. I think saying that this is the end of the use of this imagery going forward. And sure, you can talk about phasing out existing things, but really taking a stand that from this point forward, we don't do this. And then I think there needs to be some larger conversation around, as we saw in the emails, are we then hanging on to the word warrior? Is that something that's part of the long-term plan for reconsideration? And just starting to really plan for it and think about what does it mean? In what ways can we move forward in honoring any Native American land acknowledgement that was mentioned before, but just kind of having it be a part of a whole plan. So, thanks.
Thanks, Gina. I think Pam, your hand was up next.
I think I'm next. Yeah, it's amazing how well this is flowing, because what Gina just brought up is what I was going to bring up. And after reading these very powerful statements that you shared with us, I think you have to go all the way and get rid of the warrior name as well. I don't know how much, if it shouldn't be any more difficult than getting rid of the imagery. Maybe it is, but I think the message is loud and clear that the warrior name is inappropriate and offensive as well. I also wanted to maybe just throw out an impression, an observation, and I don't know if this is true, but it's kind of picking up on what Audrey said before. I think most of the current and future students really don't care one way or another. I don't think it's a very meaningful or powerful something that they're really wedded to. I think this is maybe back in the day, maybe people even put on feathers and painted their faces, to celebrate homecoming. I don't know, but I just don't think these symbols have nearly as much meaning for current students as they did for the alumni. So I suspect there'll be a little bit of noise and it'll go away.
Thanks, Pam. Mel, if you guys still had a comment, you can go next. Otherwise, I can skip you.
Yeah, I feel like I'm disrupting the flow, so I'll be really short because maybe my comments match the next items more. But just based off of what Leslie was bringing up in her questions and her wonderings, is that I do feel like there's work at other buildings, and I have seen what I would consider maybe more subtle stereotypical images that are not necessarily permanent fixtures of buildings, but are certainly placed in places where people can see them. And they might not be racial related, but they are certainly culturally related to other identities that students may have. And so, this goes beyond just looking at the Indigenous imagery in our district, but I think we need to be aware that there are certainly images at the elementary level that could be othering to members of our population.
I think I'm next. I'm going to offer another perspective. It's likely not a popular one, but it's another way to sort of think about where we are in step with the larger picture, I think. This feels to me like it's something we could talk about working on immediately. And when I think of the larger picture of what we're trying to do with the audit, that sort of feels like a larger picture process that we're taking and we're thinking to think about what needs to be tended to and doing it through a process. Now, we could do immediate action. And the thing that comes to mind is if we're moving to change, we're moving to educate and not just change. I think there's an idea of moving in strong because we can be strong. We can knock things down, and I'm okay with removing it as well. But if we're moving a group of people through education, we want to move with them instead of through them or against them. So when can we do that? It's not going to be every time, but what does it do to make a plan and saying this is our plan of action and then doing those things versus sort of a right now thing because we can and we're going to make a stand. I'm just naming it. I don't say that there's a right or wrong, but there's different ways of the how to get to that end goal. And do you follow a process or do you do we need it right now? And I'm open, just kind of a perspective to put out there.
Tim, you've had your hand up the longest. Go ahead.
I just want to provide a little more context on the actual artifact. There is a curtain behind it, but it's actually painted on plywood. It'd be very easy to disassemble the components and bring it down. There is an acknowledgement plaque there, although the language certainly is not contemporary, doesn't resemble the UW-Madison land acknowledgement. It was originally designed as an acknowledgement project, and it was by two students in 1975. They did work with the Ho-Chunk Nation on the depiction, but while And of course, I was in elementary school in another state at the time. Way predates me, but all of the accounts are that while they worked with the nation on the depiction, one, it was by the standards of 1975, which was 45 years ago. And I've never heard that the Ho-Chunk Nation endorsed it. But when some of the folks that have spoken earlier alluded to the possibility there might be different perspectives on the matter, I think that's where it stems from. There is a perception among part of the community that this was done respectfully and in collaboration with the Ho-Chunk Nation. But again, 2021 is not 1975. So, I think, there always are a range of options for a district to kind of move forward for these things. You can simply, make your motion for action and move to removal. You can have a community engagement and community education process around the issue as part of the removal. And that's really, I think, something that, the board could decide, whether we want to provide, our perspective to the board on, which avenue, we would prefer to do. And, obviously that's up for us. I think when we talk about all the other things, T-shirts, gear, I think that it'd be a fairly simple matter for the district to assert its brand and say, if you're using the Waunakee name, it cannot have any of X, Y, or Z. That's one thing that could be done. And then where we do have any teams that have anything on the uniforms, if the board wants to move ahead with removing this, in I think most cases, those were probably booster club purchase. We might need to set aside some funding to more immediately retire and replace those uniforms, but that's certainly something that would be within the option of the board to do immediately, or at least fairly immediately. So just some background and ways that the district could, move forward with retiring the imagery.
Thanks, Tim. Joel, I think you had your hand up before Brian. Go ahead.
Yeah, so kind of what Laura said. So for me, for the tapestry, to me, there's really no education piece with that. It would be no different if you had some sort of like slavery image or something that referenced, something in a negative light. And I'm not saying, again, was it Tim, you said 1975, that it was done with good intentions. But the thing is like something right now, that is not something that's acceptable. And I definitely do agree with education, but I feel like sometimes we get caught up in that, and that process can take so long. And I think what I worry about is, I remember when this imagery got onto Facebook and half the community was up in arms, like, don't touch that, when people were just talking about it. So the thing is that, being the committee that we are that voice. So it's not if we're going to do something or not do it, right? I feel like that is something we should be doing because we know that it's not correct. And then we could come up with how that process is going to look. So I guess I feel like, and I don't know if what you said, Laura, if you were saying that in terms of taking down the tapestry, we should have more of an education piece to it, or if you just meant as a whole, if we're going to start like rebranding and taking off imagery off like clothing and our name.
Thanks, Joel. Brian, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I know rebranding is in the scope of our near future. And that is really sort of taken down. We've got 20 some logos, different logos. We need to get down to one. So I was at Interim College when we rebranded our logos throughout our athletic department, and that all comes down to one central logo, the color schemes and everything like that. So, and Tim sort of, brought something to my mind too. that a lot of people don't know is our uniforms are not purchased by the school district. They're purchased by these booster clubs, and booster clubs have control over that right now. So that will be another thing that when we have a branding discussion, is that we need to bring that control back into the school district, so we do have control of what goes on our uniforms and stuff like that. So this is something that we need to get going on. And so, and if somebody, you know, when you have time and there is a website, changethemascot.org, and there is a history of a progress. So for 50 years, they have been removing, and I'm sure it's been a little bit longer, but they've chronologically set this up. So since 1968, around the country, they have colleges and universities and teams have removed their imagery. And in here, I bet you I could count 10 to 15 times where a Wisconsin school or institution changed it. But obviously Waunakee has done nothing to change theirs to sort of meet the standard and stuff. So I think this is an important thing. It does need to go in writing to Mike and I. We will definitely present this and get it on an agenda to the board. You know, also with branding, it costs a lot of money. Okay, not saying that, you know, removing imagery is easy, but having to go through and possibly remove the warrior name. Personally, I have no problem with the warrior name, as long as we're not depicting any certain ethnic group or certain group of people. That is probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to remove it from fields and the turf fields and everything else like that within the schools. So just a little background on that. But again, I think where this group needs to be moving is getting something written down, and so Mike and I can present this before it becomes May. Because we are only meeting once a month now. So I think you guys have a lot of great ideas. But again, something needs to happen, but it will be a learning and education moment for our community, because this is probably not going to happen overnight. It could happen over a couple of months, and there will be public comments. And so both sides sort of need to line up their perspectives and present to the board.
One thing, thank you, Brian. One thing I guess I'll ask for is if whether or not anyone wants to share, whether or not they disagree that the imagery should continue to be used. If anyone wants to share that, I'd welcome it too. I would kind of echo what Brian said, Justin, that if I were starting a mascot or a school from scratch, I don't think I would ever use warriors. I mean, we don't have enough caregivers and healers in the world out there, and you notice that no one ever names a mascot after them. That's just what we do, unfortunately. But that being said, as Brian noted, there's, I think it's fair to say that administration has put us in the position where it is about as simple as possible to change something such as the imagery, because it's been phased out so slowly over time that it wouldn't really cost anything other than removing stickers from football helmets at this point, and a policy to phase out the use of clothing. Changing the warrior name, I think, would cause a pretty dramatic uproar for something that could be nondescript. And even though I don't particularly like it personally, it's all over everything. It's on every scoreboard, it's on every floor, it's on every field. It's branded into local businesses, which would not love having to change their branding either. I started at this from the same perspective of get rid of everything, but I understand people having much more of a connection to the name because that's been here forever. The logo that's a sticker on football helmets hasn't. No one's grandfather played football with that logo on their helmet because it hasn't been on that long. So if anyone wants to share a countervailing perspective, it would be great to hear it. Other than that, Joel, you had your hand up next, so go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a motion to be able to put it on paper so we can get it to the board.
I second that motion. I was gonna motion, but you beat me to it. So, and I would like to be specific here too, Joel. The motion is to remove the mural from the high school gym. We're not motioning to get rid of the name
No,
Warriors. We're not motioning. We're motioning specifically as a start to get rid of that mural. Now, I think that, Brian, you made a really good point. I was thinking all of it, but when you made a point to say fiscally, it is very expensive for schools to redo everything. Working with a lot of school budgets at a really high level, you're right, that would be really expensive to do. So I guess I'm sold on waiting on that. But I think the mural, yeah, I second that.
Mike, should we vote?
If there are other hands, do we not hear them out first?
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay, I was like, I think you're mute.
I was talking about how much I love Robert rules, so trust me, no one missed that. So we haven't had a lot of motion work, but we have had a motion by Joel and a second by Nia, who then clarified that this is solely a motion to recommend removal of the mural in the high school gymnasium. So you've had a motion and a second. So now we're open for discussion on that. We've had 3 hands come up since then. I'll take them in that order. Allison, you're first, okay?
I just have a question with what will happen to the mural. Maybe it's a naive question, but when it's taken down, I'm just curious, like, is there a place where like artifacts, historical artifacts from the district are housed? I know like how I shared what I saw at another high school, like, is there any, I don't know if there's a place, and again, totally a naive question because I'm not as familiar with the high school. Is there a place that has anything that has historical pieces, or is there just like a closet that this is going to go live in for the rest of its life?
Good question. Pam, you're next.
Yeah, I'm kind of still inspired by the recommendation earlier that we go bold, and just removing the mural. I think we can make a recommendation bigger than that and go for the entire removal of the imagery. And I think there's something also to be said for not doing things piecemeal. Just get it out there, get it over with, and be done with it, rather than having this process drag on and get more people upset about it, even if they don't know why they're upset about it.
Well, we have a motion just on the mural right now. That Pam, if you want to make a motion after this to do that, I'd totally be open to that too. But the one we have on the table right now is just Joel's. So
Well,
Tim,
she,
go ahead.
she can also amend.
Yeah,
right,
that's
to add
true.
it to. To add it into one motion.
And then we call it a friendly amendment.
So in any motion that is currently pending under Robert's rules, there can be 2 amendments to any such motion. So Pam, if you want to make an amendment to tack on to the recommendation to remove the mural, that the district also be recommended to promulgate a policy to remove the use of American Indian imagery in the school district, that could be done if you want to make that amendment.
Yes, what you said.
Joel and Nia could also just accept it as a friendly amendment.
That works.
So, I mean, I have concern. I understand that we're trying to go big, and I have no problem going big. But my concern is that when we present something where we want to take all imagery out, I can see nothing being done that could be done right now. And I think that's my only concern with that. Not saying that I don't agree with you, Pam, in terms of, yes, we need to just do it. But, you know, we know that the process is not going to just happen. That mural can just happen and it can just come down. And to me, I look at it like, yeah, again, that's that low hanging fruit. And then as a committee, we just need to move forward, just not move at a faster pace. So I actually don't like the amendment to what we're doing. That's just me.
I think that's a good point, Joel. I mean, the one reason, and Pam, this is why I'm kind of sympathetic to your perspective on it, is that mural is effectively hidden. No one really actually knows it's there unless it's pointed out or they're looking for something to see. people are carrying the Waunakee brand with a spear and a feather all over the county, and people see it all the time. And I get comments in Madison like, "Oh, you're in Waunakee," and I tease that out, and it's people upset about that. So that's something that gets broadcast. And with the popularity of sports and how successful sports are, that's something that gets seen everywhere. So I mean, that's why we have a former congressional candidate emailing the board on an issue, because it's something that's important to a lot of people and they see it. It's visible, and the imagery is just more aware because it's out in the community so much. Tim, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, two things. One is, to your point, Mike. And I've seen this research before, but then one of our individuals that submitted public comment tonight referenced Stephanie Freiberg's research. And, one of the arguments for moving to remove this imagery from school settings is related to impacts on students of Native American heritage, which I think we probably undercount the way we collect demographic statistics in this country, both in our community and, as you said, Mike, in communities where our teams play or visiting teams that come into our spaces. And it is true, although that is a very large art installation, that painting does not have a lot of eyeballs on it. There are staff members who work in the high school for years before they become aware of it, actually, whereas the uniforms have a much wider audience. So I think you make a valuable point there, Mike. I do want to be clear on language. I prefer to call that the painting in the old gym, because we do have a mural outside the Performing Arts Center that is supposed to be an historical scene that also has Native Americans on it. That has not been controversial to my knowledge. And that's an actual mural that we have. We also have some metal work in the pyramid entrance. I'm not aware of any controversies over that either, but I just want to be very clear about which art, and I think we all know which art installation we're talking about. And I just prefer that we call it the painting in the old gym, so we know anybody who looks at what we put on paper knows exactly what art installation we're talking about.
Katie, go ahead. You're next.
I first want to say my opinion. I think we go big too. I think you make a statement that we need to make change, and I'm not sure just removing the painting is a big enough statement. So here's my naive question. Can you make 2 recommendations to the board? Does it have to be one all package? Can we make the first recommendation is that the painting in the old gym is removed, and the second recommendation is that we rebrand the logo?
Yeah,
like,
you can
does
do
it
that.
have to be all packaged together?
No, you can do that.
I agree with those. I'm not sure I could vote with both of those together, so those being separate helps me. I guess the biggest thing as a teacher in the district, this comes to my mind as we think about going big. Again, it's going to be similar to the, I'm usually a go big person, and I've been go big, and I've shut people off in my lifetime because my passion for it has driven them away, right? And so that's where some of my pause comes in terms of when we open up and we take this stand, where does this backlash come to? Does it come to schools? Does it come to principals, teachers, the board? And are we prepared with knowledge to be able to stand up for what's right? I guess, like I can name it and speak to it, but I sit here on an equity committee that I'm super passionate about. And I worry about seeing it as this adversarial thing that we go big if we're not prepared. I mean, when I think, Joel, you talking about the reporting systems for kids, right? We're opening it up, not just for adults, but these children. And oh, well, so-and-so, we're getting this taken away because. Does that start more infighting between kids because families have different perspectives? Are we ready to go big? That's my biggest thing. I'm not afraid of it personally. I'm afraid for the factors that I can't control and those other maybe kids that are affected by our decisions to go big now.
Laura, the board will take the hit. For 1 year on the board, we will take the hit for anything that comes through, it seems like. So, and that's okay. But the other thing too is, if you're going to plan, if I was planning this and we had a board meeting on public comments, I would have several experts and people that it directly affects stand up and provide an education and their 2 cents to the board. So.
Am I next? You're on mute, but I'm going to take that as a yes. So I'd like to say, Pam, thank you. I love going big. In fact, I either go big or I don't bother calling in on a Zoom. My only problem is having gone big every single time is that it doesn't work out very well. I'm with Joel. I think we should do Joel and Katie and Gina in the comments. Let's do this in 2 parts. Let's take this down as a first proposal, if you're okay with that. And then say, hey, and then we want this too. And what's the most realistic way for us to do this? I think fiscally, we really have to consider that. I'm in charge of distributing all of the CARES Act money out throughout Wisconsin, and it's a lot of money, and it's not even enough money. So I can't imagine how expensive it would be for schools to, especially Waunakee, to reconsider that right now. I'm just really thinking of that in a money management scope. And so I just don't think like right now that's where school money should be going, just because we have so much other issues that we have to deal with, like making sure kids have internet and all these other things. But I love going big, Pam. And if you were okay with it, can we split it into 2? So we do this low hanging fruit and then say, hey, then we're proposing this item too. And as Laura said, I'm ready to give people hugs from a 6-foot distance for anybody who needs a hug because we're saying goodbye to the mural. It's okay. I'm ready to play the world's smallest violin. I'm ready to do anything. I am here to hear people's story and their grievances. I'm a professional grievance here, so I'm here. Thank you.
Pam, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, procedurally, if I need to agree to splitting it up into 2 different motions, I'm perfectly fine with that. I also think, though, that in terms of are we ready to respond to the backlash, I honestly, true confession, before I started reading these reactions that we saw today, I was a lot more wishy-washy about it. When I started hearing from the Native American community just how hurtful these are and how these do cause feelings of isolation and psychological burdens on Native American students. I mean, I think that's our ammunition, our answer to the backlash right there.
I think the proper Robert's rules method, if you want to effectively just withdraw the amendment right now, you can ask whether or not the assembly consents to that. So unless someone objects to withdrawing that amendment, that's fine. If anyone objects to that, just state now. Hearing none, we'll just consider that Pam's initial amendment to the motion by Joel and Nia regarding the painting in the gym as correctly described by Tim. So we're just back to the original motion then. So then Leslie, you're next. Go ahead.
Okay, so, all right. So so that changed the direction I was going in. You just confused me, Michael, but here's what I'm going to ask here. So we're not going to proceed with two motions, is that correct? We're only going with the one?
For the moment, yes.
For the moment, we're going with the one. With the anticipation or the assumption that we'll move forward with a larger scale motion to discuss related to cultural appropriation and other imagery. Is that correct?
I think someone will probably make that motion.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joel.
Well,
I think,
here-
sorry, Leslie.
okay, no. So the point that I wanted to make though, just I needed that clarification because the point that I wanted to make is that we cannot lose sight of our mission, goals, and objective for this community. And we're going to have the tough, the difficult issues to address. And we have to have courage to stand and defend the decisions that we make within this committee. Now, that comes obviously with a body of knowledge and understanding of what we're walking into. But I think that we all, a matter of fact, it's not even I think, I know that we all can do this and do this knowing that it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, not only for ourselves, but for our community, for our children, for other families. It's the right thing to do. And I think that that's what's important for us to stay focused on. And that's how it becomes easier to go big and prevail. Keep in mind, to go big and prevail. Thank you.
Joel, go ahead.
So what I just wanted to add to that is, again, it's not about me not going big, but I guess I feel like this is not going to be the only time that we can make a motion to do something. You know, I don't feel like we always need to tie things together. Maybe certain things need to be tied together. I feel like we should just vote on the first thing. And then if we want to talk about what we're going to do for the next thing, we could do that too. One thing that I was just hearing as well, I also want to be educated in the sense when we do get that backlash. I do not want to just say do something and then we have nothing to say. And I'm not saying that's the case, but I want for myself, be able to be educated more. So when we are taking on that fight, we actually have a leg to stand on. And I know the leg to stand on is right, but we know, I mean, again, if you just look at the community, there is going to be people who are passionate about certain things, and they're not going to just, you know, roll over and just say, okay. So, and again, we also don't know the impact that other people have in terms of, I mean, you think about, you know, kids going back to school and how difficult that fight was and the influences that community members had. So we just don't know that. So I think let's just make sure we don't set ourselves up to fail as well. But I do agree with everybody in terms of, yes, we do need, that's our role. That's why we're all doing this. So we should vote, Mike?
So Mike suggested that I propose another amendment and you could accept it as friendly, or we could vote on the amendment. But I would propose that we remove and replace with something that makes our intent clear. And I love the suggestion of the land acknowledgement. And I feel that that would make clear what the intent is and what the movement towards is. And it from the beginning really gets at that. Don't come at us and try to say you're honoring. This is what real honoring looks like in the words of current Native American citizens of our state. So I wonder if Nia and Joel would accept that as friendly. And if not, I'm ready to propose that as an amendment that we could all vote on.
So for me, that's 100%. I like that idea. I agree with that.
Joel, you leave me stranded. I was like, does it cost money? That's really what I'm
Well, that doesn't really cost money, right?
The land
I mean,
acknowledgement? Yeah, you got to get like a little plaque and like.
That's small enough the administration can write a check and the board doesn't have to.
Are you sure? Because I think about like the cost for like Wi-Fi for students who can't get Wi-Fi, and I'm like, it seems like we should.
I got a plaque contact. I'll get on
Okay,
it.
all right. And really, I actually
we could do a GoFundMe.
Fine. I see that our high school rep Sam said he would like it, and I like to include our student body, so I can. Yes. Okay.
All right, I want to call the question on this topic for right now. So at the end discussion, so we can actually take action on a vote.
Okay, I'll second that, and that's not something that needs to be voted on. So the question's been called. Hearing no further amendments to the initial motion, I'm going to do this by roll call vote. So sorry, everyone will have to say aye or nay.
We're voting on the amendment.
No, it was offered as a friendly amendment, so the original motion maker said that that's fine to include in their amendment, so.
Can you read back the full thing then? Or
Yes.
can somebody?
And thank you, Gina, for sending this in text so I can go straight off of it. The amendment is to, well, the motion now with the friendly amendment is a motion to recommend to the Board of Education that the painting in the high school gymnasium be removed and replaced with a land acknowledgement. All right, so all in favor, I'm going to go down the list. So Joel Lewis.
Aye.
Brian
Yes.
Paper.
Aye.
Gina Pagel.
You're in mute, Gina.
My space bar trick failed me. Aye.
Allison Voller.
Aye.
Leslie Petty.
Aye.
Isabella Moore.
Aye.
Pam Potter.
Aye.
Melanie Meister.
Aye.
Tim Shell.
Aye.
Michelle Berg.
Aye.
Nia Vang.
Aye.
Laura Ostrander.
Aye.
Melissa Hernandez.
Aye.
Bethany Pottinger.
Aye.
Katie Grundall.
Aye.
Paul Whitley.
Aye.
Audrey Devon.
Aye.
Diane Rusk.
Aye.
Monique Mobley.
Aye.
Sam Kaufman.
Aye.
Christy Shovelman.
Aye.
Mike Pisani.
Aye.
And Mike Brandt. Aye. So that passes unanimously. Unless I missed anyone, I think I have you all on camera. All right, so that passes. That'll be forwarded on to the board presumably at the next meeting. Does anyone else have any additional motions to make on that overall issue? Pam, you have your hand up.
Oh, this is a new motion that I'd like to make, to recommend to the board that all Native American imagery be removed from school-related, and what would be a good way of phrasing it? That all Native American imagery be removed from
The school district.
school-related, sorry, what?
The school district.
The school district? That's going to cause problems with that big mural, I suppose. I think it has to be any kind of
Mascot.
branding.
specifically? Branding.
Sorry?
Branding.
Branding.
Mascot and branding, yeah.
Mascot and branding. Okay.
Pam, I'll second your motion and then I'm going to immediately offer an amendment to it. And if you'd accept this as a friendly amendment, we won't have to vote on it. The way I would word it is to recommend that the board establish a policy and a procedure by which that removal is done so that people have the ability to offer perspectives and opinions on this, so that things such as the Woodner mural that Tim talked about would be acceptable or could be used in an educational manner. We're not just erasing history or anything here. The purpose being we're removing appropriated symbols that don't have an educational purpose.
By a certain date?
By a certain date.
I would say it's going to take at least a year for them to go through everything and work with the branding, but they could begin the process. So fall of what, 22, 23? That's not right.
So the recommendation would be to recommend that the board establish that process in order to do the removal, making it more about a process rather than just an outright do it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a recommendation from us. We're not dictating what the board should be doing. So I'm fine with the amendment, but I think if we phrase it as a recommendation that symbols be removed, Native American symbols be removed from branding and mascot materials associated with the school district.
Okay, I think we can word that in the minutes to be relatively clear after I bumbled it after you stayed at the start. Okay, there's a motion and a second. Does anyone want to share opinions on that? Bethany, go ahead.
So I can understand why there might need to be kind of a phase out of the imagery that's already there, but I wonder if we could add something to it saying that we're not going to continue using it right now, so that like when staff sweatshirts are made, they're not made with the imagery, so that like a year from now, that's already now something that we're not going to use.
That's the way I took it anyway. So I guess that would be the way I would word it in how we document that going forward. Leslie, go ahead.
So is it my understanding that you are going to recommend a policy and procedure to the board? You're going to, what is the motion again?
The motion, and Pam, correct me if this is incorrect, is your request is to recommend to the board that Native American imagery be removed from the district, and that the board establish a timeline and a process by which it will direct administration to go about this process within a specified period of time.
Yeah, that sounds, yeah, that's what I had in mind.
Okay, so the one thing that I do want to put out there to make sure that not only Native American, as I had mentioned earlier, that we also have to be sensitive to any other cultural appropriation that's out there. So I don't want other cultures to be dismissed and only there is a focus on Native American. So that's why I wanted to be clear about what I understand what Pam is saying, and yes, I agree with Pam is saying, but I also don't want us to be very narrow in our scope of what we're going to ask the school board to consider or recommend. So I think we need to also make sure that we protect all cultures and that they're all used in its appropriate.
Okay. Leslie, I think that's a great point, because I think arguably we've had a policy that is against discrimination and against bullying and against any sort of racism anyway, and that's been on the books for years, and that hasn't precluded people from doing war chants and saying fear the spear and all sorts of other things too. So
right.
We have a policy, it's just how is that policy then put into process, and this is overall just a recommendation of a process to do one thing. You're 100% right. If there are other things, we need to find out about them and then do a similar process, I think.
That's right, exactly. That's right. And I think what happens is sometimes we're unconsciously biased and we don't pay that close of attention to it. So what I want to make sure is that we are sensitive to all cultures. It's ensuring that this is not only focusing on Native Americans, that we broaden our scope to ensure that it crosses all cultures.
Joel, you had your hand up next. Go ahead.
So I think this is where I still think we need to pause and have more of a conversation. So we're definitely, because what Leslie's saying is correct, you know, because again, we don't want to tell the board one thing and then come back with another thing because we need to amend it because we forgot this or noticed that. And I guess we could do that anyway. But do you think, I guess my question to the group is, can we have another conversation about this? I'm not saying that we can't do it, but let's just do it right. Rather than just telling the board, this is what we need to do. And then, you know, other things start coming up that we haven't really thought about.
Pam, go ahead.
So I was just kind of working along the low-hanging fruit principle that this is just reaching a little bit higher on the tree. This is something that we can concretely recommend and realistically accomplish, and also explain in very concrete terms. I absolutely agree that that what Leslie is recommending is the next step. But I think that does involve a much longer conversation and perhaps even requires gathering more data about what are the things that we think are coming up with more, maybe coming up with a policy, but then coming armed with a number of examples of things that we think really need to be addressed and eliminated.
Gina, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, similarly, I just, I think there's a need for specificity, first of all, because it was noticed on the agenda that like, this is the chunk we're talking about. I agree wholeheartedly that cultural appropriation in any form in the district is something that we need to educate staff and our schools about, and we need to include that in future work. But I do feel like if we wait to have this all-encompassing thing, it leaves a little less impact perhaps, just because I think this is like a clear, again, we're looking for action, and I want to just make sure that we aren't like waiting on clarifying it, that this is something that it's going to take the community a while to chew on, and the district a while to work towards rebranding. And I know that Mel mentioned some instances that she could think of. And specifically, I don't mean to open this can of worms, but in terms of holiday, I think that's where Mel was going. And I think we do have a lot of work to go, but I do feel like that's a distinct piece. So that's my thought on that.
Monique, go ahead. You had your hand up next.
I was thinking about a cherished tradition at the Waunakee High School is our Cocopelli Cafe, and that's something that would have to be looked at also as another branding issue. It is to Kachina Hopi culture images, you know, so we're looking more than just sports. We're looking at a lot of different parts of our building, and Cocopelli Cafe is run by our special ed department, and they do an incredible job with diversity. There's a beautiful mural in front of the Cocopelli which celebrates diversity in our students, yet theoretically the name of their cafe is something that the students of Cocopelli would need to look at, of coming up with a new name.
Tim, go ahead.
So what I was going to suggest was, you know, on the whole issue of additional imagery that of concern, later on the agenda, we have a reporting tool that we're probably going to endorse. At least I hope we will. And if we don't, we're probably going to have a reporting tool anyway. So, you know, I think it'd be very easy, and it's not an uncommon aspect of these reporting tools, to have something that includes, you know, environmental concerns as well, in addition to speech, attire, violence, things like that. So, you know, my suggestion would be just make sure we have that on the reporting tool, trust to that. And at such a time as we're able to have non-staff, non-students in our facilities, you know, my advice would be, if this is something we have concerns about, we could always potentially, again, at such a time that we can get into our facilities beyond just the staff on this committee and the students, organize some committee equity walks. And we could actually spend part of the meeting touring each of our facilities. And, you know, again, because I think those of you on the committee who are not current staff or students are parents or have been parents, but we have 6 schools, and you may not have had a chance for your children to go up to the middle school or high school yet, or it may have been a few years since your children are in one of the elementary schools. So we could do the reporting tool, and I think hopefully in the coming months, do some committee walks of our facilities. That would be my suggestion.
Tim, I will tell you that that was initially one of the ideas when this committee was being formed in my brain, and that was prior to there being a pandemic. So that's I think it's something we can look forward to doing. That's what I was hoping we could do at some point.
Mike, can I call the question on this one as well so we can keep moving, or is there a lot of hands up?
There's no hands up at all, so thanks, Brian. Seeing no further hands, I guess I'll just take a vote on this. So on the motion as previously offered by Pam and seconded by me, regarding his process regarding removal of American Indian imagery. I guess I should do probably a roll vote on this one too, because I'm guessing there might be some nays. I will go on the list then. Joel Lewis.
I'm going to say nay, but it's more because I need more, I think we need more time and more, for me, education based on this. I like what Tim said.
Brian Hafer.
Aye.
Dina Pagel.
Aye.
Allison Wooler.
Nay, and similar to Joel, I'm not sure if we're supposed to say that, but just more thought and planning to be carrying this forward.
Leslie Petty.
Nay, I feel the same way. I think we need to, I'm all for it, going with a broader scope and getting more research, collecting more data, information. Thank you.
Isabella Moore.
Nay.
Pam Potter.
Aye.
Melanie Meister.
Aye.
Tim Shell.
Nay, and again, the concept, let's take a little broader scope on this and return to this at the next meeting or a future meeting.
Michelle Berg.
Aye.
Nia Vang.
Aye.
Laura Ostrander.
Nay for now.
Melissa Hernandez.
Nay.
Bethany Poncher.
Aye.
Katie Grundall.
Aye.
Paul Whitley.
Aye.
Monique Mobley.
Nay.
Sam Kaufman.
Nay.
Audrey Deppen.
Nay.
Christy Shepman.
Aye.
Diane Rusk.
Aye.
Mike Pisani.
Nay.
And Mike Brandt, aye. So that's 12 to 11 ayes in favor. So the motion carries. All right.
That doesn't mean we're not coming back to everyone else's.
Right. It doesn't necessarily really mean anything, to be honest. The board will very likely look at the fact that it was 12 to 11 and say, well, we should listen to them and get more information.
Right.
All right. So moving on to the next part of the agenda, unless anyone else has any additional motions about that. Moving on to the next part. Recommendations on the offerings of professional development and or training for staff to address events or incidents of bias or bigotry. Joel, this is really yours that you wanted on the agenda, but I think everyone's pretty clear about what it is. I guess I'd lead this up by saying, I don't know what PD staff has had regarding this already. That's a source of ignorance on my part. So if you've gotten a lot of PD on this already in the last couple of years, please tell us. But if not, you think it would be useful, this is kind of a question for staff. Do you think this is something that you would like to be mandated or think would be useful? Because most of us don't know what staff is getting in terms of their professional development. So with that, I'll shut up. Melanie, go ahead.
So are you looking for recommendations on what type of PD, or are you interested in my perspective on whether we need or structure around what professional development?
I find that I actually have no idea what PD staff is getting regarding this specific issue already. And for all I know, Joel and I just don't know what is already being offered, and this might be redundant to what you've currently gotten. So it might make this not necessary, but I don't know. So it was open to staff who knows more than me.
I think for those who were employed 2 years ago, everybody was required to do a brief, maybe it was like an hour-long, 2-hour training on Speak Up, which is a teaching tolerance kind of step process of how to recognize hateful language, how to interrupt it in the moment, and then how to provide like a teachable kind of conversation around it. But I think as staff has emphasized in previous meetings that was offered systematically 2 years ago. So the fact that we have new employees, they wouldn't have received that. I don't know about employees beyond like teachers or student services. Like I'm thinking about like paraprofessionals, where they were required to be part of that. Was administrators required to be there? I think I have those questions, and I think that's just one portion of training, and I do value that training, and I think it has a lot of good behind it. So it's not anything about that structure or that training. It's just thinking about how do we ensure that we keep bringing it back and making sure new employees get it, and it's not just certified staff, it's all staff in our buildings, custodians, people who work in the kitchen. I mean, there could be hateful language anywhere, and those individuals need to have the skills to also recognize and speak up. But thinking about kind of the first step in that process is you have to recognize when you're hearing hateful language. And I think we all know that there's some maybe more obvious examples of hateful language that most people would be like, yes, that is, not okay, and I will speak up to that. And then there's maybe some more subtle things that within the American culture, within Wisconsin culture, within Waunakee culture are just sayings that happen that do have a hateful basis. And without a different type of professional development to supplement it, those things could get missed, if that makes sense.
So I can speak on behalf of at like administrative staff at the DPI administration office at Jeff 3, if we were there. We do get prior to 2020, it's you get like a 2-hour course where you have to go through and do all of that type of training. If there's a few positive things that came out of 2020, it's that at the admin level, they recognize that having a 2-hour course in the span of your career about these type of like very, very difficult conversations is really not enough. You can't solve and change behavior by having a 2-hour course. Really what it does is it sets like a minimum expectation. So that's what it does. But now the catalog of all of the training opportunity about this stuff is actually quite large and not comprehensive, I wouldn't say, but like it's much better than it was. So we do have a lot of things like, checking your biases, and as a supervisor to like 15 staff, I can sign it out annually or as needed, which is great. It's an option. And today they actually rolled out an equity and inclusion plan as to hiring for DPI. It's like 20 pages long. I was looking through it and I don't see anything about how this applies as it rolls down to schools though. Like I see it in like how we're going to do that for our building, but I don't know how that applies. Just for your awareness in this team that it came out today for DPI. I don't know how that applies for schools though, but we do have a lot of training available and there is a lot of conversation about this at our level here and just so people are aware of that. And it is equally uncomfortable and varying in opinions. So thank you.
Monique, go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with the previous speakers about there's a lot of training in PD that's offered, and I'm a paraeducator. We are always invited. I can't speak for how many attend, but I know that there's high interest whenever the schools do PD for the paraprofessional staff. I will also say that Randy Gutenberg was asked at the last superintendent meeting that we already are getting an awful lot of PDs. And so teachers are getting a little bit overwhelmed of like, PD, 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 because you're given a great PD, but then, you know, it kind of gets filed away and then we go do something else. And so there's a little bit of concern of, there's a lot of great programs out there. They all build upon each other, which is something that Randy said, you know, where everything we do builds upon the others. Nobody's in disagreement with that, but there's just so much PD that you're kind of getting a little bit, it's very overwhelming to take that all in. And it's just something that I think it's all important. And I think that people do appreciate the time that is spent and the speakers that come in to do it. But then the next day, it's like you're back to business as usual and trying to just get your work done and work with the students and work with your team. There's not that continual reinforcement of the PDs that we get, which might be a little bit more helpful to keep it alive, to keep that message alive.
Thanks, Monique. Pam, you're next.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering what we as a committee can do as far as this question is concerned. Probably the best thing we could do might be to ask the board to look into whether there is enough professional development and whether it's effective. But again, I don't know that we have the time or the resources to really get a good sense of whether it's enough and whether it's effective.
Bethany, go ahead, you're next.
So I totally agree with what Monique said about a lot of the PD that we're offered is great, but it needs to be more continuous, or it needs to be more reinforced. Another thing that I've noticed, especially in the last year, is that there have been lots of book studies that have been offered, or things offered here and there, but not necessarily things that all of the staff needs to do this one thing. This is going to kind of be our foundation where everybody has the same vocabulary. We all kind of have the same understanding here. And now we're moving forward. And I think that's the kind of thing that we really need as a school district. Like, it's great that we've got this books group studying white fragility, and we've got this one doing culturally responsive instruction, but you know, we need everybody to be kind of speaking the same language and having the same foundation. And then that needs to be, it needs to become part of our school culture, that everybody is practicing it and discussing it and holding each other accountable.
Tim, go ahead, you're next.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on this. I think it would be a real positive for the committee to make a formal endorsement of providing a consistent program of professional learning for our staff in this area. So for teaching tolerance, the Speak Up resource, which went into the chat, it is not a comprehensive solution. I think it's a very important component. We offered that for all licensed staff 2 years ago. There have been some great points made up that para educators were invited in, but that's not, the training occurred on days that are not mandatory days of attendance for our para educators. If they come in, they can time card. We could provide that as mandatory training. So I mean, I think mandatory training, this training should be expanded for all employee groups. I think that would be a good concept to have embedded in the recommendation. We did require it for all of our new hires last year. With the pandemic, we hadn't ported it over to Zoom this year. So this year's new teacher hires have not had it. Last year's, we offered 2 in-person after-school workshops. People had to attend one of the 2. We have exit survey information from participants. I think the most common request for participants is that we return to it and that we move beyond the introduction of resources into role playing of scenarios. That's been a consistent theme in all of our feedback. And I think the advantage of having a formal endorsement is I have not heard any negatives about the Speak Up at School resource. There are a lot of potential ideas for what could come into our professional learning time, though. And it is a matter of setting priorities. A position by the committee helps determine this is a higher priority. And I do think this probably needs to be something that needs to be part of our routine. We do have, Teaching Tolerance does have a 1-hour webinar that they did in conjunction with NEA, actually the Wisconsin chapter of the NEA. I think we need to have the role playing happen. I also think asking people to watch the webinar as a refresher as part of the back to school process has merit. We can discuss that. I think the other thing that's out there as a comprehensive piece in this space is, and I'm going to get jargony there, so somebody needs to take the red anti-jargon flag and toss it. But a big focus for us today in education is social emotional learning. And, academics are always important, but building inclusive, respectful school communities has been something that's received greater attention. And I'll stop filibustering in a moment here. But we've adopted a model called developmental designs. It's a model Madison Metropolitan uses as well. And we are rolling that out in training. So if you've seen the morning meetings and the advisories as a parent this year, that's developmental designs. The developmental designs team, and I'm talking the national resource, feels very strongly that training needs to be provided to educators in their true multi-day training instead of a train the trainer model where we send people out to training and then they bring in 1, 2, 3 hour trainings back in the district. So that's why we haven't trained everybody in it yet. But our goal is to continue with the developmental designs training over a multi-year period until everybody's had the training. And in the meantime, there is a certain amount of professional learning that comes along with using the materials for advisory and morning meeting.
Thanks, Tim. Allison, you're next. Gina, I want to at least state for the record a really good comment you put in the chat there. Just and Joel, I think this kind of gets to your point you brought up previously, and you might say even here. Gina, you wrote that I very commonly hear staff say that they feel unprepared to address instances of bias and bigotry. They also report they don't discuss current events because they don't know what to say or do. This is an issue I'd love to see all staff have dialogue and training about. So I appreciate you saying that. I've heard the same thing when I ask what would you like more of, and that's a similar refrain. And Joel, I think that gets to what you may want to say here too, but Allison's first, so go ahead.
I was just going to share, I work at Prairie, and from the Prairie perspective, I'm not sure if this is happening in all the buildings for all the staff, but our leadership is committed to following up on a monthly basis or more than a monthly basis, but at our staff meetings within our building on issues connected to equity and diversity. So they're bringing back things that are happening at the larger district level and just continually talking about them at our building. So I know that's been very helpful. There's also, we have different connection staff does with outside, like national coalitions connected to equity. The Nehemiah project is working with our social studies department to look at curriculum and connections with equity and diversity. So we do have different pieces that are happening for professional development, but I do think it differs by building on what the leadership within that building has experience with and what they are prioritizing.
And Joel, go ahead. And if anybody else wants any more comments on this, put your hands up now. Otherwise, I'll cap it after him.
So I apologize. I lost my internet connection. And if I say something that was already said. So for me, I think it's, obviously we were talking about biases and bigotry and people don't know what to do or they're unsure of. I think that's where, like what Tim was saying, role playing is really valuable. When you come up with scenarios and you can kind of have that conversation, go through it. The other thing I think what needs to happen, it needs to have a culture, and I think Bethany said it before, that everybody has to, it shouldn't be really a choice. It should be something that everybody is speaking that language. Because again, there are going to be people who obviously might not be happy to do so for whatever reasons. But the thing is that, if we're talking about culture, and especially if we're talking about incidents of bias and bigotry, those are tough conversations. And I feel like, the easiest way, and I think what Tim was saying is and I was kind of thinking about this myself, maybe doing something in terms of like a webinar at first, right? Coming up with something where everybody has access to do something as a starting point. Because my only concern is that, you know, to get everybody trained, that's a huge process, right? Besides everything else that you guys have to do. So I think it's really important to be able to start, and maybe starting with what you already have, and then maybe either expanding it, either like web-based or something like that. And I'm sorry, I lost my connection when we were doing the vote. What was the vote count?
For the
Before.
previous motion,
Yeah.
it's 12 to 11.
Okay.
Katie, go ahead next.
So I'm organizing the K6 developmental designs trainings that are happening currently this year. And I know Bethany put in a question about that. So we actually have trainings that are occurring the next 3 Wednesdays. So people who are our internal coaches and admin are getting continued training actually tomorrow in an all-day training. Next week, anyone who got trained last summer, which there was about 8 from each of the buildings, K6, have the opportunity to get refresher training to continue their leadership and implementation. And then the March 3rd, we are actually offering a training to support staff. So they will only include 20 people in each training. So when I'm dividing that amongst 4 buildings, that means I get 5 support staff in each building on an average to be attending these trainings. And all day, paras are getting time card for anything that's outside of their typical workday. I don't know what's happening 7/12 because I don't organize that. In addition, we'll be running additional 4-day trainings this summer for DD, and I believe it's 8 to 10 participants per school. Knowing that though, like the cost for these trainings are significant. So like that's probably maxing out the budget of rotation of the number of people we can get trained within that time frame. Because they don't do train the trainer models. It's pretty costly and a lengthy process, but it's a good program.
Laura, go ahead.
I'll just add one piece to that. I'm one of the internal coaches of the SEL team. In addition to all that developmental designs, what we're trying to do in order to bring some of that information to the whole staff, at least across the elementary schools, is we're creating informational slideshows that'll be about 15 minutes long, and we'll do about 3 or 4 of them at the remainder of the year to bring to all staff some of those high leverage pieces within that programming. So I think we've done a really good job as a SEL team, really trying to do what we can do this year, and it feels like things are starting to come together for the future. So I think we're headed in that direction.
Thanks, Laura. So there isn't a motion on this issue at all. If anyone has a motion to make, Tim, I think you kind of stated that it would be useful to have something, but I'm not sure how that's worded. So if you have any clarification on that or want to make a motion, now's the time, I guess. Go ahead, Tim.
Timmy, I was just going to make a motion that we should put something down on paper and give it to the board. Maybe Tim, where, you know, maybe you can help with that wording. So then maybe second that.
Something along the lines of the committee endorses training for all employees on cultural sensitivity and addressing bias in the schools with a plan for annual refreshers, and just kind of, I think, leave it like that. I think we can come back and give progress monitoring reports to the committee, and we can kind of potentially fine tune our course as we go forward. But I think that would address the continual aspect and also address the breadth aspect And it's not the most specific language, but it would move us towards some things that we currently have not been able to accomplish yet.
So moved as stated by Tim. Is there a second?
A second.
Seconded by Joel. Rebecca, is that clear enough for you to write the minutes for Tim, for what Tim just wrote there?
Yes, and Tim's just down the hall from me, so I can review it with him too.
I figured that would work.
I think before we vote, I feel like maybe we need to be clear on what we're voting on. And so I would love for us to get in the habit of putting in the chat what the motion is so people can really know what it is that we're voting on. I don't feel comfortable voting on something that's going to be worded later.
Tim, would you mind restating and I will type it down for us?
Thank you.
I can read what he said if you want me to.
Sure, that's probably easiest. Thank you, Rebecca.
The committee endorses training for all employees on cultural sensitivity and addressing biases in the school with a plan for annual pressures.
That's fine. That's my motion and Joel seconded. Okay. Any further discussion on that motion?
Is there a way, there is some vagueness in that for me, where how do we ensure that that is like a bulk amount of time so that spirals through? Because could that be one sit and get and be done? You know what I mean? Because I think there's a piece, I'd like to capture some of the language that not only it hits all staff, but it's continuous and it's somehow applicable to the work that we're doing. I'm not sure if we can get language like that in there, but I think those are meaningful aspects of it.
You can always make an amendment to the motion to require that it be for all staff and that it hits specific types of issues. Nothing's wrong with that.
I mean, other people, I mean, maybe I'm being picky, but I think, I don't know, other people want to weigh in, please do.
I too would really like to see that, like, I heard the word annual, that's a measurable thing. But frankly, I want it to be more than annual because we've been doing lots of stuff annually and then that's like, period, we did it. And I would like it to include, we do it annually and that I don't have any words left at this hour, but something about having it be a consistent part of building level something. Help me out, somebody else.
Maybe we say, because I was thinking that same thing. Maybe we just say it can be modified as need arises or situations arise. So it's not just you have to wait towards the end of the year before something changes, because I think you want it to adapt with you as you're going through, right? So maybe something about modification if need be in terms of frequency, specific, I don't know, I'm just pulling things off the top, but Gina, what you did say, we always do annual training and we know how that goes. So maybe just adding that, like what Mike said, maybe just amending it and putting something in there that it's going to meet the needs of what the teachers and staff need.
Bethany, I think your hand was up first. Go ahead.
So I'm not sure exactly how to word this, but I guess I'm a little concerned about the idea of like having a training and then having refreshers annually, because I feel like this is a really big thing that is going to be a really big paradigm shift for some people. So it seems like it needs to be more than just, here's an hour-long training or even here's a day-long training, but something like throughout the school year, we're going to do a book study and do a chapter every month, or it's going to happen like each quarter, there's going to be more of this training, or just something so that so that the breadth of this topic is really addressed. Because I don't want to have this be like a, yep, check, we did this thing. I want this to be like a, no, we're doing this thing all the time. We're doing it.
Leslie, go ahead.
So I think the best way for us to look at this training is to look at it, and perhaps we can include some language. It needs to be included in performance evaluation. So there is some level of accountability. So however performance evaluations take place for teachers in the school and administrators, I think that that's where the accountability, that's really where the rubber hits the road, where you incorporate this particular area, diversity, equity, inclusion, what that looks like. But I think that that is where you're able to apply that knowledge that you get from training, followed by the work you do every day. So I think that that's really where it's not just, it's more than just a training. You have to show accountability. How do you show accountability? By setting the expectation and incorporating that within your role, within your job. So that would be my recommendation.
Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, so just a few thoughts. And Leslie, I do think we need some look-fors in our evaluations that do speak to these. I will say that the state framework that we use for most of our licensed staff evaluation is not particularly strong in this area. We do have a professional rubric we use for our induction program that has much greater strengths. But to use that for licensed staff, we would need to work with DPI on an approval process for that. That's something some of us in Dane County have talked about entering into a collaborative for to approach DPI. There's a framework called Optimal Learning Environment, and it's what we use through our new teacher project induction program, and it's a much more contemporary and inclusive framework, but it's not the Danielson system. But I like your idea. My only question is, should it be part of this discussion, or do we need to plan for more of a human resources talent development special meeting down the road? Just food for thought. With respect to the motion, I agree it's a fairly low bar. The generic nature of it in the low bar is I'm trying to come up with language that encompasses all of our employee groups. I've heard some very constructive ideas from the teachers on our committee. And if we wanted to segment out something simply for our licensed staff, I think we could definitely, because our licensed staff are regularly in learning meetings. So when we talk about continuous and embedded, we have structures ready to go to reach those employee groups. We have other employee groups, and it's not necessarily a great commentary on staffing systems in school districts, but we have other employee groups that have different kinds of meeting structures, and sometimes the trainings they have are focused on other matters. So I did intentionally set a fairly generic thing, trying to encompass all of our employee groups. If we wanted to say and really all employee groups at some point in time have some contact with kids. So we can't really distinguish on who has contact with kids and who doesn't have contact with kids. And we can probably do a lot of problem solving around this, but I see very easy ways to kind of raise the training expectation for several of our employee groups. I think for other employee groups, it would take some restructuring of how we allocate their time. So that's the why. Always open to feedback and adjustments to it.
Go ahead, Monique.
So building on what Leslie and Tim are talking about, I just wonder, with the training that I've been doing for years and I enjoy, I feel like oftentimes it's preaching to the choir. Those who are kind of on board are like building their skill set for working with these issues, and you always find a few takeaways from everything that you hear. But then there's some groups of people who, they go, they sit, and they leave the room, and there's not that further thinking of like, what could I maybe do differently? And I think it gets really hard because from the school staff, we don't hear the successes of when teachers have spoken up because of privacy issues and different issues in terms of how these things get reported. We don't often hear the success stories of, and I know they happen because I hear about them through grapevines, but I don't know how much staff is often hears that what you did was right, and that kind of goes at a building level, so people know that people are speaking up and that, you know, there are safe places and that teachers will have people's back. I think we're well trained. I think, Tim, you offer great training programs, but how much is it changing some staff's ideas about how they're just going to be? And then when we are successful at it, I don't think we really hear about it. So it's hard to know. You go and you're like, yep, I got another really good training, some more good ideas. I'm going to try to do something good. But I never hear an applaud of like generic, no names, no, you know, no faces, but I don't often hear things publicly that have gone well. You hear them when they're going bad, but you don't hear them when they're going well. So maybe that's something we could figure out a way to work on.
Mike, go ahead.
This builds off of what Leslie said too, as far as what I heard was accountability into the motion of some sort of measurable outcome. So maybe like being able to identify bias in self and others and being aware of its effect. And then staff also feel comfortable addressing racial issues with and among kids, because what I heard from all of the desire for the training is some form of an output or an outcome, and that could make it a little bit more measurable.
Joel, go ahead, and then Brian.
All right, so what Leslie said, that to me is the ultimate goal, right? Because think about a lot of these things should be tied to evaluations to make sure that people are doing it. Because I think about the book study, right? For instance, how many people are actually doing the book study? I don't know a number. But what I'm saying is that if everybody's not doing the book study, then if you have a training like this, everyone's not either present or not wanting to be there for whatever reason, or they want to be there. And like what Monique said, that some people, it gets their skill set, you know, it deepens their skill set, but for other people, it doesn't. So I think tying it to some sort of evaluation or some measurable thing that's going to impact the individual. So you know that the person is like the target that you're looking at, which is bias and bigotry and diversity, equity, inclusion, that people are actually moving towards that. But just to kind of add, if I guess for me, what I also hear what Tim is saying is that if there is nothing right now there and we need to put something there so it gets the attention of administration, I think maybe that's what we need to do, so at least we can get that attention. So this is my 2 cents.
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, so really what we're talking about, a lot of us who aren't in the system don't exactly know, trying to get our head around professional development within the system. I would like to actually see us table this and let Tim and some of the people that are working that actually go through PD think about this for another couple of weeks and bring us something that's a little bit more concrete. Because I think you're sort of talking about working it out. You've got a lot of people around here that have given you a lot of information regarding what the public sort of thinks these things should be. But I think, I mean, we can sit here for 3 more hours and talk about all this stuff, but I think with Tim and the certified staff and the staff that are on here, I would like to see them think a little bit more, table this and bring this back for a 15-minute discussion the next time and really clean it up and be ready to go. Because respectful out of everyone's time, we're 2 hours in as well and still have one more thing to talk about tonight.
So Brian, are you making a motion to table?
Yes, I'm making a motion to table the 6B. I mean, again, we could make something now, but I think everyone's got a lot of information to give. So I'd like to see this tabled, come back and have a short discussion and a good recommendation next time.
Second,
Okay, so seconded by Tim, a motion to table doesn't require debate. It's not amenable, so we'll just move to taking a vote on your motion to table, Brian, okay? All in favor of tabling the motion for now and bringing it back as you stated, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Hearing none, that motion to table passes unanimously, so we'll make sure that that's on the agenda for our next meeting. I think is appropriate.
Can I just,
Good, Gina.
I want to make sure we have a plan for who's doing what between now and then.
There's a
What?
meeting in your future, Gina. That's what that motion means.
No, what I'm saying is I don't want another meeting, but I do want it to happen. That's what I'm saying.
Well, you know, just to add to that, what Brian said, I mean, the teachers really should be telling us what type of development they need and what's going to work. So to hear that is, you know, I mean, I can make suggestions, but it would be nice to hear from, you know, the teaching staff to be able to come up with that. So.
I mean, I'm happy to kind of come up with the proposal, but I really would like to bounce it off, you know, Katie and.
I'm happy to reply by email.
I will try to be sensitive of everybody's time.
You know, when it says recommendations of the offerings, maybe you send us on a link of the offerings, maybe we can take a look at that. But I think really what it comes down to, it's the staff and Tim to sit there and talk about what they're missing, where are the holes, and then bring that back and actually put together. We are going to recommend, obviously, something, we just need to wordsmith it and get it correct. So it's continuous, it's all inclusive, it's comprehensive, and it's, you know, reviewable and.
Tim, I'm happy to help brainstorm and plan around this. I probably have a good K4, maybe K6 perspective of the different staff populations and subgroups, but I'm thinking that we would want representation from the middle school and high school as well.
Yeah. So Katie, why don't you and I follow up, and Gina, when I give advice, I should follow my own advice. And I do want to do a shout out to everybody that's on this committee, whether you are district staff, families, students, other community members, for your time commitment in this work. I really do think this is an extended process, but I do think we're making good progress, and I appreciate everybody's time.
Okay. All right. So last agenda item is on the recommendations on the creation of enactment of a dedicated reporting system for events of bias or bigotry. Does someone want to take the lead on this one?
Yep.
Joel,
So we're going to so we'll make this quick. Tim, do you want to just kind of give the short of it?
So Joel and I have had some meetings. We've and the be all and end all is Joel and I are continuing to meet. We're on a timeline to come up with a prototype tool, bring it into this group at either the next meeting or the meeting after, bring it into other stakeholders for some feedback. But what we really want to get a prototype out soon so we can implement it this spring, maybe even as soon as coming out of spring break, get additional feedback and make any retools we need to do for 21-22. And to that end, Joel and I have met with Amanda Goodenough, who is at UW La Crosse, who did some training with us last year. We met with a representative from Iowa City that has a tool, and Joel and I are going to have a drafting meeting next week to get our prototype ready for everybody.
Great job, Tim.
Just going what you and I have been working on, Joel.
Do we need to act on this at all, Mike? You just.
Doesn't sound like it. It sounds like that's something to come up at a future meeting.
Yep.
All right, well, with that, that gets us to the end of our agenda. Thanks, Sam, for noting in the chat that we'll probably have to send out another doodle poll for meetings in the future because there might be a conflict with the community learning project that I'm assuming some of us here are going to be on and some of us in the village are on. And that might have a conflict in April. So I think, Rebecca, what we'll probably do is we'll send out another doodle poll for the scheduling of the next meeting, okay?
Okay, right now your next meeting is scheduled for March 30th. And as I indicated to you and Joel, I was guessing you might schedule one sooner, but that's okay. So do you want me to schedule something other than March 30th? Or are you looking for something different?
We should probably meet before March 30th. That's far off.
Okay, so I have some dates in mind. I will put out a doodle poll tomorrow morning for those dates in early March.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
All right, I think I heard, Joel, you've got a bassier voice, so I hear you go over everybody, but I think Brian was also a motion. So is Brian, are you seconding that motion?
I'll second that motion.
All right, motion by Joel and seconded by Brian. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, it doesn't matter if you oppose because I'm going to close the meeting. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.